And, very, very warm welcome to today's webinar. And really thank you for taking time, out of your day to join us. And, whether you're tuning in from the insurance industry or the healthcare or transport or finance or, wherever you are in terms of industry, we're really glad that you're, here today and able to join us. So my name is Martie de Beer, and, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Telviva. And for the next 45 minutes, I will be your host. And, the topic that we really want to cover today is just the connected business, how CRM and communication integration is really redefining, the customer engagement landscape. We live in a world where your customers expect you to know them, regardless whether they call you or WhatsApp you or whether you land on a web chat. And yet so many businesses, are still operating with communications and CRM running in separate silos, really leaving their teams without the context and the data, accurate data rather. And then also your customers are getting frustrated. Now that gap, is really costing businesses, more than what you realize. So today we are going to just spend some time just to unpack that and exactly what that means. So we'll be covering, real life world shifts in terms of, what customers are expecting, what the best practices are when we look at integration, and really what integration also looks like. And then also just spend some time on the rise of digital channels, specifically the world of WhatsApp and where AI is taking all of this, kind of to next. So in terms of joining me today, I am so happy to have two wonderful guests with me. The first one is Lochner Eksteen. So Lochner is actually a Joburg-based entrepreneur, and a lot of what he focuses on is on the Salesforce side in terms of implementation, as well as AI implementations. And he's also the host of the First Principles podcast, and really someone who brings a rare combination of creative thinking and deep digital transformation, experience to help businesses navigate complexity with real clarity. So very welcome to you, Lochner. And then we also have Doré Botha from Intercape. Now, Doré is, she brings quite a fascinating perspective as someone who bridges the world of data and technology, with real business outcomes. And she's also got a background in actually applied mathematics. And she's got some hand-on, experience building internal systems and really driving that digital adoption for specifically Intercape. Now she is really she is living that transformation, transitioning from, just from the inside at Intercape. And maybe just a few housekeeping notes, before we dive into the next 45 minutes together. Most of this panel discussion will be in a Q&A format, and you'll find that in your application where we're hosting this webinar from, there's a little Q&A section. If you're, throughout the session, if you've got some questions, please pop them in there, and we'll be sure to address them right at the end of the session. Okay, then, maybe let's just get into it. And I'd like to kick things off by maybe Lochner, both yourself and Doré, and we'll start with you, Lochner. Just what has been, in terms of customer, engagement and that change over the last 3 years, and really why is this conversation now more urgent than ever to really look at customer engagement? Lochner, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for everybody's time. Good to have everybody, and thank you for your time. Martie, I think a few things have changed. 3 years, 5 years, 2 years, 6 months, they all feel the same the last while. It's all melting into one massive change. I think two things technology-wise that has changed is, number one is WhatsApp about 3 years ago really started becoming part of the framework of businesses, how they engage with their customers. Before that, you had little groups or maybe a rep who's got his own little WhatsApp on his phone or whatever the case might be. But I think the last 3 years, you've seen a massive uptake by the enterprise companies and so on to communicate with their customers via WhatsApp. And I think it's expected now. I work with customers in different countries. In South Africa, you need to have WhatsApp. Some other countries you don't have to because they've got chatbots or whatever the case might be. But South Africa is based on WhatsApp. And I think another big thing that has changed is the market or the typical customer out there is now used to chatting to something like Claude or ChatGPT, whatever the case might be, the screen, and it gives them insights and it knows them. Now all of a sudden I need to jump to a customer's website and chat to them, and all of a sudden the experience is different. So there's now two different standards. It's call it the AI standard, and then the business industry standard, and the business now needs to catch up with what customers are expecting. So that's the two big things for me the last 3 years.
Very true. And I think, Doré, if you can, just weigh in there and, what has changed most in customer engagement, for you over the last 3 years? And then again, just why that conversation is now more urgent than ever.
I think the biggest shift is just the way and how customers want to communicate, because they have more information than ever before. So they expect communication tailored to their specific preferences, and they prefer digital channels over voice. So a few years ago, our customer communication was largely transactional. So ETAs, booking assistance, support on general questions, and everything was rated post-service. And this is no longer enough. So we've seen the shift play out in our own business. So 30% of our sales are now completed online, and that is split between our app and website chats, compared to the 12% in 2021. We've also seen a huge decline in customers visiting our offices in favor of completing transactions digitally. The other major change is the move from reactive to proactive engagement. So previously, companies could afford to address problems as they arose, but this model no longer works. Customers now have instant access to social media, and one single negative experience can become very public very quickly. So we need to maintain open, ongoing feedback channels, not just to manage our reputation, but to close the gap between how a company thinks it's delivering the service and how customers are actually experiencing it. And these two realities are often further apart than people realize. So this is exactly why this conversation is so urgent, because the margin for mediocre engagement has collapsed. Brands that relied on legacy loyalty are finding it far more fragile than their numbers suggested. Economic pressure has also made loyalty increasingly transactional, because as we all know, when wallets are tight, customers prioritize competitive pricing over brand attachment. Emotional loyalty is far harder to earn and easier to lose than it was 3 years ago.
No, Doré, I'll maybe just pick up from that. And Lochner, I think the one thing that, if we look at today's day and age, are companies still struggling with silo data systems in this day and age? And, or is that problem kind of solved? What are your thoughts on that?
Look, even if you solve a part of it, businesses are complex. So, I'm talking about businesses in South Africa. In fact, the bigger the businesses, the more siloed they are. It's difficult to integrate these big old legacy systems into each other. The smaller businesses are actually easier I would say, are probably more connected than others. What I do find is that even if, for example, your CRM and your communication system, like your Telviva, is connected, I'll give you an example. One of our customers realized that leads were being allocated to somebody who's on leave. So the CRM is not connected to the HR system, because HR system knows somebody is on leave. So we need to get that connected. Now that's connected. Now the salesperson is there. Now they're selling some product or service to a customer, and finance tells them at the end of the month, but we can't sell to this customer because he's on 120 days his account. So there's an opportunity to connect the ERP to the CRM to make sure that we have these age analysis details with our salespeople. Most companies, unfortunately, that we speak to, even though the most advanced ones who look very cool in the front end, are still siloed to a big degree. And I think most of us can attest to that when we deal with suppliers and businesses. Some of them are ahead of the curve, but most of them, unfortunately, are still working in silos.
Maybe that's a good segue just into kind of this concept of, kind of what our webinar really is about today is, what does a truly connected, business look like today?
Look, I think on the telephony side, for example, if I phone, it doesn't matter which division in the company I phone. Let's say it's an insurance company, if it's claims or sales or retention. If they answer, they need to say "Hi, Lochner," regardless of which division it is. Now, some companies are set up that I call into service, the service desk, they know who it is, but the claims or the assessor or whoever the case might not know who I am. I think a truly connected business, really when that call hits the CRM, every person who's a front stage actor who deals with a customer should be able to know who I am, what my history is, and they should be able to have a quick view of my experience, or at least my touch points with the business.
I think a good point that you made earlier on, Lochner, as well, is that connected business is front stage and backstage. Front stage meaning what the customer is engaging with, and then backstage is the systems actually, like you had that example with, HR system being connected to the sales system. So connected happens two-sided, one from the customer's end, and then also, from within the actual business as well, because that cohesively essentially gives you, that business or the customer experience that will essentially, improve. So I want to chat to you a little bit about, just maybe about that, let's call it the integration reality. For businesses that are still running their CRM and then also their communications platforms separately, what's the most common mistakes? You guys deal with this, on a daily, but what are the most common mistakes that you're seeing? And what does it actually cost them, for these mistakes when you have those two components running independently?
Okay, I think to give it a bit of background, I like the example of a car. So a brake light, which you don't need to remember to switch on, is like a little dashboard light. So I drive around, it's a core activity. I hit the brake, the light goes on. I don't need to remember it. Your indicator light is a tangential activity. So I need to remember to switch it on. It's something apart from my normal driving behavior. And if you live in Joburg or most other places in South Africa, you'll know it's used about 30% of the time. So same in the sales or CRM, ERP world. I need to know that if somebody is making a call, taking a call, whatever the case might be, that it should not be a tangential action. I don't want them to remember to also make a note that they made a call to the customer, or remember that the customer called them. That stuff needs to be automatically tagged in the CRM. The less I ask of my user to remember, the less we'll need to worry about them switching on the indicators lights, moving around in the business. And then the second thing is, once you've got that, so let's say an example, I'm a salesperson in the company, and all the calls that I'm making daily and receiving is automatically logged, and there's some sentiment report or whatever the case might be. It's like asking Rassie Erasmus to coach the Springboks by only looking at the final score. If I can't show him the handover points, the passes, the call drops or the ball drops, the whatever the case might be, nobody can coach a user if they can't see the little incremental steps that led to that result. And big thing in any performance-oriented company is coaching, and you can't help your staff, you can't help your people be better if you can only see the result. You have to see all the steps that led to that result. So that's my take on that, Martie.
Thanks, Lochner. And I think the other component, just staying on this, the integrated business, topic is, what, from your perspective, Lochner, is what operational improvements do businesses typically see, after that first integration?
Listen, I think trust is a big thing. Number one, if any executive on this call goes and sits on a Monday morning in some OpsCo, ExCo meeting, and they look at dashboards, do you trust the data? Because if that data is not trusted, those dashboard, and most people know their businesses well enough to see that little green or red thing on the dashboard, they just know, it's got the sixth sense that it's not correct. And they know it's not correct because they know the business, number one, and number two, they know some of the data or some of the activities is not being tagged as data points into that dashboard. Second thing that happens is staff turnover drops. We see it all over the place. Staff turnover is a massive problem for most businesses. Finding good people is a problem now. If you've got people, good people and expensive people who need to remember to type this and remember to do this and remember to do that, anxiety levels just, go through the roof over time, and you've got staff turnover. So my experience is staff turnover drops significantly when you've got a connected business. People don't need to remember to send this email or to ask that one that you follow up with the customer. There's a flow state that happens. And I think the last big thing for me is the finance division, the finance departments. Start trusting the operational part of the business. So when an order comes through, or a PO, or whatever the case may be, if it came from sales or ops or service, and there's some form of interconnectedness between these systems, all of a sudden you've got this, what's traditionally a very distrusting department, all of a sudden saying, listen, we can start trusting this data. It's not just some, cowboy sales guy who's sending us stuff to act on. It's system created data points that we can trust.
And then I think, the other important thing, if we look at integration specifically, is, that real-time data synchronization. Now, specifically on the point that you made earlier on in terms of, the reporting side, etc. So I think, what is important, maybe if you can just take us through that, is just how important really is that real-time data synchronization, and really what breaks when you don't have it?
I'm going to answer that by my answer would be, depends on where your customer is in the process. You can't win all the battles, you can't win all the games, right? So it's very expensive to try and win all the games, and it takes forever, and by the time you've won all of them, there's new games to win. So I'll use the example I always like to use this. If you're, for instance, Martie, at a restaurant, you and your husband walk to the front of the restaurant, how long are you prepared to wait until somebody seats you? When they seat you, how long are you prepared to wait for your food once you've got a glass of wine in your hand? It depends on where you are in the process, right? So what I want to say is, if you build your systems that at certain critical points, there's connections, there's integrations where we know. So for example, in the restaurant, the waiter is really the CRM, right? So he connects the website where you come in with the kitchen, with operations, to make sure that you get the final bill and the right invoice, whatever the case might be. So your system needs to almost act like a waiter. Gets the person, seats them, serves them, but has access to all these other parts of the business to serve your customers.
100%. I think, the digital world is kind of, being that concierge of, your customer experience. So Doré, maybe I'll shift to you for a second to through, like a real world digital adoption example. I know that, Intercape's been on this journey of digital transformation for quite some time, but I want you to maybe just take us back to the beginning. What was that trigger point that made you realize, look, our existing customer engagement approach just wasn't working anymore? If you can maybe just take us through that.
I think there was one single moment that we realized that it was more of a gradual realization that we are now falling behind. And one of the first triggers was we realized that our customer base was shifting. Our clientele was the younger people, and it became clear that they like communicating in other ways that the older generation did, because older generation, they felt comfortable calling our contact center because that was the natural thing to do. That's what they used to. But our younger customers actively avoid phone calls. So they want to resolve things quickly and digitally and on their own terms. So at the same time, data and Wi-Fi became significantly cheaper and more accessible, and airtime was no longer the default. And people were living on their phone. They were messaging, browsing, and transacting, and we needed to meet them there. Then there was also the operational reality. As our passenger numbers grew, as the business grew, so did our contact center wait times. And I think we all know that nobody likes to wait long in a customer center wait line. So the longer queues meant more frustrated customers, which led to more complaints and then a lot more pressure on our teams. So we couldn't just keep adding capacity to an outdated channel. So we made the deliberate decision to adapt. We took what we already have and we decided to use it more strategically. That shift in thinking was really the beginning of building a customer engagement approach that actually worked for where our business was going, not necessarily where it had been.
Maybe just to pick up from that then, Doré, is if we look at, just your transition journey, which channels did you guys, just adopt first, and maybe just give me the why? And also in terms of your WhatsApp journey, was that part of your early decisions as well to move ahead with that?
So we started with our web chat on our website, and that was our first step away from just the purely voice-based engagement. And that was the logical entry point at the time, giving our customers a way to reach us digitally without picking up the phone. And then our WhatsApp came in 2019, and our decision was straightforward. Our customers were already using WhatsApp because it had such a massive footprint in South Africa, and it had essentially become the default way for people to communicate. So meeting customers on a platform that they were already using every day, it just makes sense. And it reduced friction on their side and opened up a felt natural rather than forced. So from there, our digital engagement evolved as the technology did. So in January 2025, we introduced a WhatsApp chatbot called Interbot, and that brought automation into the mix to handle high volume and repetitive queries much more efficiently. Last year, September, we moved to a fully omni-channel platform called Eksteen, and this brought all of our engagement channels into a single unified environment. Later this year, we're also adding Colby, and this is an AI-driven call analysis tool that analyzes tone and sentiment in voice interactions, and this is to better assess and coach all of our agents. So even as all of the digital channels grow, the voice hasn't disappeared. And this Colby helps us make sure the quality of those conversations keep improving. So it's been a deliberate progression. We're not chasing every new tool, but we're rather adopting technology at the point where it generally just serves our customers better.
Yeah. So I think good point in terms of, just that adoption and omni-channel and just kind of your progression, towards digitization. I think what is interesting, Doré, is, what role does omni-channel engagement play in your CRM strategy today? And, how do you ensure that there's consistent experience, across every channel?
So omnichannel is so important in how we engage with our customers today. As I said earlier, the big shift happened last year, September, when we implemented Eksteen. And before that, our channels were largely siloed. So a customer could contact us on WhatsApp and then call in, and the agent that's on the phone would have no visibility of that previous interaction. The customer would have to repeat themselves, which is exactly the kind of friction that erodes trust, as Lochner also earlier said. So now with our omnichannel, every agent has a complete view of the customer's journey, regardless of which channel that the customer used to reach us. Whether the interaction started on the web chat, WhatsApp, or even the phone call, the agent can see the full history. That context makes the conversations faster, much more personalized, and far less frustrating for the customer, which is the end goal. So on the consistency side, we work on two levels. First, our agents follow response guidelines for common queries. So this ensures that our customers receive accurate and consistent answers, regardless of who they speak to or which channel they use. Second, our team leaders conduct regular quality assessments on every one of our consultants with a threshold of 95% that the agents are expected to maintain. And this ongoing monitoring is what keeps the standard from slipping as our volumes grow. So the combination of the right technology and the right people practices is what makes this omni-channel actually work in practice. The platform creates a visibility, and the quality framework ensures it's being used well.
Thanks, Doré. I think as we've walked a long journey with Intercape, but for many businesses, that are worried about, that human touch when they introduce automation and then potentially, leverage into like digital agents. I mean, how do you, just manage that balance? And, what did your customers think?
So this is a concern we took seriously from the start, because automation should never become a dead end. There's nothing more frustrating than chatting with AI and you get in this endless loop that you just can't get out of. So at every point in our bot interaction, the customer has the option to connect with a live agent. And that safety net matters enormously, especially in the transport business, where customers are often contacting you because something has gone wrong and they need reassurance, not necessarily just information. So the early days were quite a learning curve for everyone. Our older customers in particular took some time to adjust, and they were accustomed to calling in and speaking to a person. So now they had to navigate with this bot, and it was unfamiliar territory. So we had to be very patient with that transition and make sure that the handover to a human agent was as seamless as possible when it was needed. So the honest reality is just that it wasn't just the customers who were learning. Our human agents were adapting too. They had to get comfortable working alongside the automation, understanding when to step in and how to pick up a conversation that was started by the bot. Also, as the Interbot improved over time, it was starting to learn from real interactions and handle our queries with more accurate information and more naturally. So what we found is that once both of the sides, the technology and the people, hit their stride, the experience got a lot better. Automation handled the high volume routine queries efficiently, which freed our agents to focus on the more complex conversations where the human touch genuinely makes a difference.
So I think just shortly, Doré, I'm quite interested to maybe just understand, what has been the most surprising outcome for you since you've adopted this digital agent in your channels, and maybe just maybe something you didn't expect when you started.
Yeah, so I don't think we expected the amount of chats that the bot would actually handle. So we were hoping for around a 15% of interaction. But in January 2026, it was already handling 45% of our chats. And I mean, we were not prepared for this. So the surprise just tells us something very important about where our customers actually are versus what we as business assume they are. We didn't need to convince our customers to engage with the bot. They didn't have to run campaigns or drive adoption, or we didn't need to hold their hand through the transition. They simply used it because it was available and it was fast and it resolved their query without having them wait for a human agent. So what that outcome also validated was the decision to meet the customers where they are rather than where you're comfortable. Our customers were already digital. They were already comfortable with the self-service. We just finally gave them the right tool. So the lesson for any business hesitating about automation is this: your customers are probably more ready than you think for this.
And that's so true. And maybe I want to just shift this conversation to just, the world of AI and what this intelligent business, could look, for in the future. So, Doré, you guys have an active, digital assistant that is on your WhatsApp as well as your web chat. But I want to understand maybe just, how is AI changing that customer engagement right now? And, are we at the beginning of this already or midwave? Just give me a sense of that.
Well, honestly, I think we're mid-wave, but most businesses are at very different points on that wave. If you look at our own journey, the progression tells the story. We started with the web chat, we moved to WhatsApp, introduced the Interbot, and then unified everything with the omnichannel. And each step has provided more intelligence, more automation, and more data. And that's not a journey that started recently. It's been building for years. But the thing that changed is AI has moved from being something that you bolt onto to something that runs through the entire engagement experience. It's how we route the queries, how we respond to customers, how we train our agents, and increasingly how we anticipate what a customer needs before they even make contact. So Callbee is a good example of that. We're not just recording calls anymore. We're extracting insights from every single conversation to make the next one better. So to businesses who feel like they've missed this wave, you haven't, the fundamentals still apply. You should know your customer, you should meet them where they are, and you should make every interaction feel like you know who they are. AI just gives you better tools to do that at scale. So the businesses that are behind aren't the ones who adopted AI late. They're the ones who adopted it without a clear customer engagement strategy underneath it. The technology only works if the thinking is right first.
Now, that's very true. And I think it's in the world of Lochner, in your environment, in terms of the customers that you are journeying with, in terms of the transition to Salesforce. Maybe just take me through how are you seeing that AI change in the way that your Salesforce customers use their communication data, and maybe just are we moving beyond just automation to genuine prediction?
Look, I think the models are already, if you've just interacted with the basic models like Claude or ChatGPT or Grok, whatever people use, the models are super smart. Yeah. The big consideration is security, right? We've got POP-AI, you've got where's the data residency. Okay, so if I connect an external LLM to my CRM, to Salesforce, that data all of a sudden moves beyond the trust layer, where your customer data goes. It's also not just, in fact, and I think Doré said it, it's not a once-off, here we go, it's implemented, and there you go. It's an iterative process. So you start with a very simple use case, potentially internally. We prefer having that for internal users to interact with some LLM, to ask it questions. And my customer is here, what do I do next? Type thing. What's funny is we see at our customers that I always joke and say, it looks like most companies already implemented AI, because you walk past people's desks and they take a photo of their screen of a spreadsheet that they need to report to their manager in the next few minutes, and they use their private GPT model or whatever to analyze it and get an answer. So AI is already implemented. You just don't have any control over it at the moment if it's not formally in the business. In my experience is there's different platforms, from Oracle, SAP, whatever. Salesforce has just all the years been the child that likes to play with all the other children. Where something like SAP is that one grumpy little German kid in the corner and doesn't want to speak to anyone. So, Salesforce loves integrating with different AI models, and it's got a very strong public API. But it is busy happening. It's not happening as fast as you would think it would be happening, because I think people are a little bit uncertain exactly how to use it and how it will affect staffing and so on. But it's getting there.
Good. And then I think, Doré, because you guys already have a real life implementation in your environment. Now, the one question that we always get, and it might be the right or wrong question, one never knows, but the concern is generative AI really replacing customer service or customer sales teams? What's your view on that?
That's the wrong question to ask, but I totally understand why you ask it, because we ask that for ourselves. when we first introduced our Interbot, there was quite a few concerns from our team. People wondered what it meant for their jobs, whether automation was coming for their jobs, whether the investment in AI was essentially investment in replacing them. And those concerns were legitimate, and we didn't dismiss them. But what actually happened told a very different story. So the Interbot took over the high volume repetitive queries, the routine tracking questions, our standard booking confirmations, and FAQs that were consuming great amount of time from our agents every single day. So what happened was now our agents, our human agents, were free to focus on the interactions that actually require a person. The more complex queries, a frustrated customer who needs some empathy, the sales conversion that needs nuance and a relationship. So our agents didn't become redundant, they only became more valuable. So I think the better question isn't whether AI replaces people, it's whether the people are spending their time on the work that only the humans can do. So if your agents are answering the same basic question 50 times a day, that's not a people problem, that's a technology gap. If you close that gap, your people can do what they're actually there for. So generative AI is making that possible at a scale that we couldn't have imagined a few years ago. But in our experience, the business that gets this right are the ones who see AI and people as a partnership, not a competition.
And I think we're so focused, Doré, a lot of the time, just what is integration going to do for our customer experience, etc. But I want to focus just a little bit on internally as well, because essentially our internal, agents are also, the business's customers. So how does integration improve the employee experience internally? So not just for customers, but really just the team that's handling those engagements.
Oh, so I'm very glad you asked this question, because it does have a big impact and it gets talked far less about than the customer experience. So before we implemented Xcali, our agents were managing multiple challenge across different tabs and applications, all on different screens simultaneously. So it would be a WhatsApp message here, a web chat there, and a phone call on another system. Every channel lived in its own silo, which meant our agents were constantly content switching. And every time they switched, there was cognitive load, potential for errors, and a lot of time wasted. So it wasn't just inefficient, it was generally stressful for our agents.
Sorry, Doré. Maybe just to pick up on that, I'll see if I can maybe just push this question to Lochner. If we look at, I want to stand back and say, let's look ahead. And how close are we to autonomous AI and maybe just agents handling entire customer journeys end to end?
Listen, that needs to take a step back, and the real question is how solid are the data foundations of these customers, these businesses, because the AI can't operate without it. So you need a connected platform in your business that's got customer data, financial data, anything that's related to that AI would want to use. In the Salesforce world, we've got a thing called Data 360. So it brings in all the different data points and creates almost like a CDP platform. Only then, when you've got that, then you can really start looking at implementing AI that's got contexts, that can answer rich questions, and that we can train specifically to say you're not allowed to touch that data or use that data as answers, but you can use that data as answers. So it's the real answer is depends on where the customers with their data foundations.
So I think the last question, Lochner, maybe just to you before we close off, and maybe just allow for some, questions and answers from our audience is, will CRM platforms, still exist in their current form in the next 5 years, or do you think this category is, about to be reinvented? What's on the horizon in terms of CRM?
It'll exist because those foundations are needed. So you'll need a place safe place where your data can reside, right? So the AI is not a place for you to go and store data. Number one, it's going to be very expensive and you can't manage it. What we talk about is it's becoming headless. So you'll have a headless CRM. So you'll have your CRM will almost become an ERP later on. Normally your ERP was your back-end system. CRM was the front end. Everything is going to move on a little bit. So ERP is going to move even further to the back. CRM is going to move to the back. And it's very possible. In our world, you've got something like Slack, for instance, where most of our customers who's using Salesforce, not most of them, some of them, especially in the Salesforce world, don't interact directly on the CRM anymore at all. They've got an interface like Slack, and you can ask it questions. There's an AI model that supports it, and that model then speaks to the CRM and the ERP, and it references those databases for answers. So it's changing, but you won't have a business in the future that just has an AI. You'll need context of records in the back end that's hosted safely, with who can see what, who can access what, who can do what with the data, who's allowed to export it, import it. All those traditional rules will remain until we get rid of humans completely, which will never happen.
Exactly. So Doré, maybe just in closing, if you're looking forward to the next 12, 18 months, where do you see that biggest single shift happening, specifically on the connected communication side?
So the biggest shift I see coming is the move from reactive intelligence to predictive engagement. So most businesses, including us, are using AI to respond better and faster. So what's coming is AI that anticipates. We want systems that don't wait for a customer to make contact, but to recognize patterns, predict needs, and engage proactively before a problem even surfaces. So the businesses that connect their communications, CRM, and AI into a truly unified environment will start to see that potential, that potential becomes a reality in the next 12 to 18 months. So if we look at our own roadmap, that means getting our Colby fully integrated, but also continuing to improve and refine the tools that we already have. Because if there's one thing that our journey has taught us is that implementation is just the beginning. The real value comes from embedding technology in and learning from the technology and letting it get smarter over time. So the technology.
Now, I'm saying you're right in that sense, is that the people, the process, the system all needs to cohesively work together in terms of that long road. I just want to see for a second just on our Q&A. We don't have any questions from our audience, so maybe Lochner, just the last few words before we close off in terms of this concept, this integrated business that we could leave with our team.
So I think one thing we didn't really chat about is not the software, but the middleware. And I think that's going to become, they expect that middleware investment by IT divisions will be about 60% of IT budget in the next 10 years, which means that people don't need to necessarily go and rip and replace their core systems to get this done. You need to get a strong middleware. In our world, it's MuleSoft. We put it in and we connect your different systems to each other, and all of a sudden you've got a connected business just by using a smart middleware. You don't have to go and rip out 4 systems and put in one. So it's more easily accessible. So the middleware play is going to become bigger to connect to your Telviva, to connect to external systems, to suppliers, whatever the case might be. So I think that's going to be the play.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so I think maybe we'll just close off. Doré and Lochner, thank you so much, for allowing your time, and then also to our audience, thank you very much for joining us. And then just in a word of encouragement, if you still have any questions for us, you're more than welcome, just to reach out to us. You have our contact information. Yeah, and then until next time, we have a lovely afternoon.
Just quickly, I see Raymond Bilson asked a question. Just want to quickly
answer. Go for it.
The question is, can all of this be cloud-based? And the answer is yes. It should all be cloud-based. I think these days, especially if you want to interact with AI in the future, you can't have an AI trying to access your local service with through a fiber or a DSL line or whatever the case might be. Cloud is definitely the way to go.
100%. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon, and we'll see you again. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.